had an affair. The guilt is eating me alive.
I wish I could just vanish.
We have to confess. It's the only way.
The night the house tried to swallow us whole began with a silence so complete it felt like the world had forgotten how to breathe. We were gathered in the downstairs parlor, the four of us, because none of us could bear to be alone anymore. The lamps had died one by one, their bulbs popping softly like distant gunshots, leaving only the weak glow of a single candle we had wedged into a saucer. Outside, the Welsh wind howled through the valley, but inside the air was thicker, colder, as though something had drawn all the warmth into itself. Then the scraping started overhead, slow, deliberate, the sound of heavy furniture being dragged across floorboards by hands that had no right to exist. A wardrobe in the master bedroom toppled with a crash that shook dust from the rafters. We did not move. We had learned that movement only invited attention. It had not always been like this. When we first drove up the narrow lane 6 months earlier, the old stone farmhouse had seemed like the answer to every quiet desperation we carried. The price was absurdly low, the isolation complete, the kind of place where a family could remember what it was to speak without the city's constant roar in the background. I was 43, an accountant who had grown tired of numbers that never added up to peace. Elena taught literature to reluctant teenagers and dreamed of writing something of her own one day. Marcus, 17, carried the sullen armor of adolescence like a second skin. Lila, 13, moved through the world as though she were listening to music no one else could hear. We told ourselves the previous owners had simply tired of the upkeep. We told ourselves a lot of things. The first weeks passed in the gentle delusion of new beginnings. We scrubbed centuries of grime from the flagstones, hung our photographs on walls that had never known color, filled the rooms with the ordinary noise of living. But the house had its own memories, and they were patient. A glass would slide 3 inches across the kitchen table when no one was touching it. Footsteps crossed the landing at 3 in the morning, always pausing outside Lila's door. Once, Elena found every drawer in her dresser pulled out and emptied, her clothes arranged on the bed in the crude shape of a human figure with its arms crossed over where the heart would be. We laughed nervously and blamed the wind, the settling foundations, our own exhaustion. The laughter did not last. The knocking came next, always in threes, always just behind the walls. If we knocked back, it answered, sometimes in perfect mimicry, sometimes with a rhythm that felt like mockery. Lila began to answer it in her sleep, sitting up in bed and tapping replies on the headboard with small, precise fingers. She never remembered doing it. Her drawings changed. No more horses or flowers. Now there were tall, thin shapes with too many joints standing in the corners of rooms, watching. She hid them under her mattress, but we found them anyway. The paper was always cold to the touch. Marcus was the first to be hurt. He woke one night to find himself floating 6 inches above his bed, the sheets still neatly tucked beneath him, as though gravity had simply decided to take a holiday. When he tried to scream, the sound would not come. He hung there for what he later swore was minutes, staring at the ceiling where the plaster had begun to crack in the shape of a mouth. When he finally fell, the impact broke 2 ribs. We took him to the hospital in Brecon the next morning, but the doctor could offer no explanation for the perfect hand-shaped bruises that ringed his ankles.
The entity learned our names quickly. It spoke them in voices that were almost ours, my own slightly deeper, as though filtered through water, Elena's softer and sadder, the children's distorted into something ancient and amused. It knew the things we had never told each other. It knew about the money I had gambled away the year Marcus was born. It knew about the letter Elena had written to a man who was not me, a letter she had burned, whose ashes still tasted of regret. It knew Marcus had pushed a boy at school hard enough to break his wrist and had never confessed. It knew Lila sometimes wished she had never been born because the world felt too loud and too empty at the same time. These truths were written on mirrors in condensation, hissed through heating vents, left in the steam of the shower like accusations from the grave. Winter sealed us in. Snow drifted against the doors until they would not open. The phone line died, then the mobile signal. We were alone with it in a way few people ever experience. The isolation did what isolation always does. It stripped us down to the bone. Arguments became vicious, then cruel, then wordless. Elena stopped speaking to me for 3 days after the entity replayed, in my own recorded voice, the exact words I had used to justify my affair to myself. Marcus punched a hole in the wall and would not explain why. Lila simply watched us, her eyes older than the house. We found the sanctum by accident. I was searching for the fuse box when my shoulder brushed a section of paneling that gave way with a sigh, revealing a narrow staircase leading down. The air that rose to meet us was not merely cold, it was heavy, as though it had been waiting behind that wall for more than a century. Candles in iron holders still stood in their niches. The floor was carved with circles inside circles, symbols whose meaning hurt to look at directly. And in the center, on a small stone plinth, lay the journal. Elias Crow had written it in a hand that grew shakier with each page. He had not been trying to contact his dead wife, we realized. He had been trying to become something that could follow her. What answered instead was never human. It was older than the hills, older than language. It did not haunt houses. It haunted the places where people broke. And it was very, very hungry. The last night, it stopped pretending. The walls bled rust. The floorboards rippled like water. Every door in the house slammed open and shut in a rhythm that matched the beating of our hearts. Lila rose first, lifted by nothing, her feet dangling, her head tilted back as though someone were whispering directly into her skull. Marcus tried to reach her and was flung sideways into the grandfather clock, glass exploding around him. Elena screamed my name, not in fear, but in recognition, as though she had always known this moment would come. I grabbed the journal and began to read aloud the final entry, the one Crow had never finished. The words were Latin, but the meaning was simpler. Confession is the only key that fits the lock. So we confessed. I spoke of the money, the affair, the nights I had lain awake calculating how much of my life I had wasted on fear. Elena spoke of the letter, of the version of herself she had killed to become the woman who stayed. Marcus spoke of the boy's broken wrist and the sick satisfaction he had felt when the bones snapped. Lila, sweet, quiet Lila, spoke last in a voice that was suddenly terribly clear. She spoke of the emptiness she carried, the sense that the world was a stage and she had been cast in the wrong play. Each word seemed to pull something out of the air, like drawing a splinter from infected flesh. The presence shrieked, not with rage, but with something closer to pain. The tendrils of shadow that had been coiling around Lila loosened. She dropped to the floor, gasping. The scraping overhead stopped. The cold retreated inch by inch until we could feel our own blood moving again. By the time the candle guttered out, the house was only a house, old, starred, and empty. We left at first light. We did not look back. The road was still blocked with snow, but we walked anyway, carrying what we could, leaving the rest behind like shed skin. Somewhere behind us, the valley folded in on itself, keeping its secrets. We survived the poltergeist, though survival is a colder word than people think. It simply means we are still here, carrying the shape of what tried to erase us. And sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, one of us will wake to the sound of 3 soft knocks on the wall. We do not answer anymore. We have nothing left to hide.